If Marcus Aurelius walked into a modern family therapy session, he'd walk right back out. And here's the brutal truth about why you're wasting your time, money, and emotional energy trying to fix your marriage by sitting in a circle complaining about each other's flaws, while a stranger with a psychology degree takes notes and nods sympathetically. You've probably spent months, maybe years, dragging yourself and your spouse to those sterile office rooms with the motivational posters and tissue boxes strategically placed on every surface. You sit there week after week, rehashing the same arguments, analyzing childhood traumas, exploring communication patterns, and waiting for your partner to have some grand therapeutic epiphany that magically transforms them into the person you married or thought you married. Meanwhile, your marriage keeps circling the drain because you're fundamentally approaching the problem backwards, and every session is actually making you weaker, more dependent, and less capable of handling life's inevitable challenges. What you're about to discover will completely shatter everything you've been told about fixing relationships and show you why the ancient Stoics had a radically different, infinitely more powerful approach that puts you back in complete control of your marriage's destiny without needing anyone's permission, validation, or professional intervention. The modern therapy industry has convinced millions of couples that relationship problems are impossibly complex puzzles requiring years of professional intervention, endless communication exercises, expensive weekend retreats, and mutual behavior modification programs that cost more than most people's cars. They've created an entire ecosystem built on the premise that you're fundamentally broken, that your problems require expert analysis, and that lasting change only happens through their carefully orchestrated process of guided discovery and therapeutic homework. But here's what the Stoics understood over 2,000 years ago that therapists today completely miss in their rush to pathologize normal human conflict. You cannot control your spouse. You cannot change your spouse. You cannot negotiate your spouse into loving you differently. And you certainly cannot therapy your spouse into becoming the person you want them to be. The only person sitting in that room who can transform your marriage is you. And you don't need to pay someone $200 an hour to tell you how to take responsibility for your own thoughts, reactions, and choices. This isn't just philosophical idealism. This is the most practical relationship advice you'll ever receive. While other couples spend decades in therapy learning to communicate their needs and set healthy boundaries, you can master the ancient art of becoming so internally powerful, so emotionally self-sufficient, so grounded in virtue that you naturally create the conditions for love, respect, and genuine partnership to flourish. The Stoics weren't relationship coaches, but they understood something about human nature that modern psychology has completely forgotten. Lasting change comes from within, strength is built through challenges, and true love emerges when two people stop trying to fix each other and start focusing on becoming the best versions of themselves. Consider how Epictetus, a man who survived slavery, physical abuse, and some of the worst circumstances imaginable, would respond to a modern couple sitting in therapy, arguing about household chores, emotional validation, or whose turn it is to plan date nights. He wouldn't suggest they explore their attachment styles or unpack how their parents' marriage affected their current relationship dynamics. He wouldn't recommend communication exercises or intimacy-building activities. He'd cut straight to the philosophical core that underlies all human suffering. You're miserable because you're trying to control what cannot be controlled, and you're neglecting the one thing that is entirely under your power. Your spouse's cleaning habits, their tone of voice when they're stressed, their priorities, their moods, their level of romantic effort, their sexual desire, their career ambitions, their relationship with their family, their political opinions, their spending habits, their exercise routine, and their emotional reactions to life's challenges. All of these fall entirely outside your sphere of influence. You can influence them, you can set an example, you can communicate your preferences, but you cannot control any of these things without becoming a manipulative, exhausting, controlling person that nobody wants to be married to. But your response to all of these things, your internal peace, regardless of external chaos, your decision to act with virtue even when your partner doesn't, your ability to love without attachment to specific outcomes, your commitment to personal growth independent of whether they join you. This is where your true power lies. And this is what transforms marriages in ways that therapy simply cannot touch. The Stoic practice of the dichotomy of control doesn't just revolutionize marriage. It revolutionizes your entire existence in ways that years of therapy cannot even approach. When you stop wasting enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy trying to change your partner and redirect that same energy toward mastering yourself, something absolutely miraculous happens. You become unshakable. Your happiness stops, depending on whether they remember to take out the trash, validate your feelings, initiate physical intimacy, or appreciate your contributions to the household. You begin responding to conflict from a place of deep wisdom rather than wounded emotions and childhood triggers. You develop the kind of inner strength that naturally commands respect without demanding it. And paradoxically, when you stop desperately trying to change them through complaints, negotiations, ultimatums, or therapeutic interventions, they often naturally begin to change themselves because they're no longer spending all their energy resisting your attempts to control them. This isn't about becoming a passive doormat or accepting unacceptable behavior, quite the opposite. This is about developing such profound inner strength and clarity that you can address problems from a position of power rather than neediness, set boundaries from love rather than anger, and make decisions about your life based on your values rather than your fears. When you're not constantly destabilized by your partner's every mood and choice, you can actually think clearly about what you want, what you'll accept, and what you need to do to create the life you desire. Take the profound Stoic concept of preferred indifference, things we naturally prefer, but that cannot determine our fundamental well-being or sense of self-worth. A peaceful morning routine is certainly preferable to chaos and conflict, but your inner tranquility cannot depend on it. Your spouse remembering your anniversary and planning something special is lovely, but your sense of being loved and valued cannot hang in the balance waiting for external validation. Your partner being physically affectionate is wonderful, but your confidence and self-respect cannot rise and fall based on their energy levels or stress cycles. This isn't about lowering your standards, accepting mistreatment, or becoming resigned to a mediocre relationship. It's about building an absolutely unshakable foundation for your marriage that doesn't crumble every single time your partner acts like a flawed human being dealing with their own challenges, limitations, and bad days. Modern therapy teaches couples to become hyper-vigilant about every interaction, to analyze every conversation for hidden meanings, to constantly monitor the relationship temperature, and to treat every conflict as a crisis, requiring immediate professional intervention. The Stoics would find this approach not just exhausting, but fundamentally counterproductive. They understood that constantly picking at a wound prevents it from healing, that obsessive self-analysis often creates more problems than it solves, and that the strongest relationships are built by people who can weather storms without losing their center. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man in the ancient world, wrote extensively about the challenges of dealing with difficult people, managing his own reactions to frustrating circumstances, and maintaining his philosophical principles when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. His approach wasn't to analyze why people behaved the way they did, or to try to change them through reasoning, persuasion, or emotional appeals. His approach was to understand what he could and couldn't control, to focus his energy on what was actually within his power, and to respond to every situation with virtue, regardless of how others chose to behave. Imagine applying this approach to your marriage. Instead of spending years in therapy trying to understand why your spouse does certain things, or attempting to modify their behavior through various interventions, you focus entirely on becoming the kind of person you respect, admire, and want to be regardless of what anyone else does. You develop unshakable principles about how you treat people, how you handle conflict, how you respond to stress, and how you show love. You become so grounded in your own values and so clear about your own choices that your partner's reactions, moods, and decisions simply cannot destabilize you. This doesn't mean you become cold or disconnected, quite the opposite. When you're not constantly triggered by your partner's behavior, you can actually be present with them. When you're not desperately trying to get them to change, you can actually see and appreciate who they are. When your happiness doesn't depend on their performance, you can love them freely without the underlying agenda that poisons so many relationships. This is what creates the conditions for genuine intimacy, mutual respect, and the kind of partnership that actually grows stronger through challenges rather than falling apart at the first sign of difficulty. The therapy industry has created a culture of relationship victimhood where people are constantly analyzing their partner's contributions to problems while remaining largely blind to their own patterns of reactivity, control attempts, and emotional dependency. The Stoic approach flips this completely. You become radically responsible for your own experience while extending complete freedom to your partner to be themselves, make their own choices, and deal with the natural consequences of those choices. Without your interference, here's what this looks like in practice. When your spouse comes home stressed and snappy, instead of taking it personally, analyzing what you might have done wrong, or trying to fix their mood, you simply respond with kindness while maintaining your own equilibrium. When they forget something important to you, instead of launching into a conversation about feeling valued and prioritized, you handle the practical consequences and let your consistent actions demonstrate your own values. When they're going through a difficult period and pulling away emotionally, instead of pursuing them or trying to force connection, you provide a stable, loving presence while continuing to live your own life fully. This approach requires tremendous inner strength, but it builds even more strength. Every time you choose virtue over reactivity, principle over emotion, love over control, you become more powerful. Every time you refuse to be destabilized by circumstances outside your control, your foundation grows stronger. Every time you respond to challenges with wisdom rather than wounded feelings, you develop the kind of character that naturally attracts respect, love, and genuine partnership. The ancient Stoics faced wars, plagues, political upheaval, exile, slavery, and every form of human suffering imaginable. They developed their philosophy not in peaceful academic settings, but in the crucible of real life where everything they loved could be lost at any moment. Their approach to relationships wasn't theoretical. It was battle-tested wisdom for maintaining love, connection, and sanity in the face of constant uncertainty and challenge. Consider Cato the Younger, who faced the collapse of the Roman Republic and chose death rather than compromise his principles. His marriage was reportedly strong and loving, precisely because he never tried to control his wife or make his happiness dependent on her choices. He focused on being the kind of man worthy of love and respect, and he extended complete freedom to his wife to choose how she wanted to respond to that. This created a partnership based on mutual admiration rather than mutual dependency. Or look at Seneca, who maintained close relationships with family and friends despite facing exile, political persecution, and eventual execution. His letters reveal someone who loved deeply but without attachment to specific outcomes, who could enjoy good times without being destroyed by bad times, and who treated the people in his life with consistent kindness regardless of how they treated him. This wasn't emotional numbness, it was emotional strength that made genuine love possible. The modern therapeutic approach treats marriage like a business negotiation, where both parties need to get their needs met, their communication styles accommodated, and their emotional triggers carefully managed. The Stoic approach treats marriage like a training ground for virtue, where both people can practice love, patience, courage, wisdom, and justice, regardless of external circumstances. One approach creates dependency and fragility. The other creates strength and resilience. Here's the insight that changes everything about how you approach your relationship. Therapy teaches you to be a victim of circumstances, constantly analyzing why things happen to you, focusing on your partner's contributions to problems, and waiting for external conditions to improve before you can be happy, secure, or fulfilled. Stoicism teaches you to be the author of your own experience, finding profound peace and strength regardless of what chaos surrounds you, taking complete responsibility for your own reactions and choices while releasing everyone else from the impossible burden of managing your emotional state. While other couples spend years in therapy, learning to communicate better by expressing their needs more clearly and listening more actively, you can master the art of responding rather than reacting, of loving without attachment to outcomes, of building a marriage so rooted in personal virtue and individual strength that it becomes virtually unbreakable. While they're learning techniques for managing conflict, you're developing the kind of character that prevents most conflicts from escalating in the first place. While they're working on compromise and negotiation, you're practicing the art of principled living that naturally creates harmony. The most shocking truth about modern relationship advice is this: the very foundation is completely backwards. Therapists focus on mutual change, endless compromise, finding middle ground, and accommodating each other's limitations and triggers. Stoics focus on unilateral virtue, radical personal responsibility, and the kind of individual strength that naturally creates the conditions for love to flourish. While therapy asks, how can we both change to make this work? Stoicism asks, how can I become so centered, so virtuous, so emotionally self-sufficient, and so grounded in principle that I create an environment where love, respect, and genuine partnership naturally emerge regardless of what my partner chooses to do? This distinction is absolutely crucial because it determines whether you spend your life trying to control things outside your power or developing the things that are actually within your control. It determines whether you become stronger through challenges or weaker. It determines whether your relationship becomes more resilient over time or more fragile. It determines whether you develop the kind of character that naturally attracts love and respect, or the kind of neediness that repels it. When you approach your marriage from a Stoic perspective, every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice virtue. Every conflict becomes a chance to choose wisdom over reactivity. Every disappointment becomes training for emotional resilience. Every moment when your partner fails to meet your expectations becomes an opportunity to practice unconditional love. Instead of seeing problems as evidence that something is wrong with your relationship, you see them as normal parts of life that can actually strengthen your bond when handled with wisdom and virtue. This doesn't mean you accept abuse, neglect, or fundamental incompatibility. It means you address these issues from a position of strength rather than weakness, from principle rather than emotion, from love rather than fear. When you're not constantly destabilized by your partner's choices, you can make clear-headed decisions about what you want in your life and what you're willing to accept. When you're not dependent on their behavior for your own happiness, you can love them freely while also maintaining your standards and boundaries. The Stoic approach to marriage is ultimately about becoming the kind of person you would want to be married to. It's about developing such profound inner strength, wisdom, and virtue that you naturally create the conditions for love to flourish. It's about building a relationship that can weather any storm because it's founded on individual character rather than mutual dependency. And it's about discovering that the very act of releasing control over your partner's choices actually gives you far more influence than any amount of therapy, negotiation, or emotional manipulation ever could. This is why Stoics never attend family therapy, not because they don't care about their relationships, but because they understand that lasting change comes from within, that strength is built through challenges rather than avoided through analysis, and that the most loving thing you can do for someone is to become the best version of yourself rather than trying to change them into your ideal partner. The ancient wisdom of Stoicism offers something that modern therapy simply cannot provide. A complete philosophy for living that makes you stronger, wiser, and more loving, regardless of what anyone else chooses to do. It teaches you to find peace in chaos, strength in challenges, and love without conditions. It builds character that naturally commands respect while offering it freely to others. And it creates the kind of unshakable foundation that allows relationships not just to survive, but to thrive in ways that most people can barely imagine. If you're exhausted from trying to therapy your way to a better marriage, tired of analyzing every interaction and walking on eggshells around your partner's triggers, and ready to discover the ancient wisdom that makes you the master of your own relationship destiny, then you're ready to embrace the Stoic path. Subscribe for more insights that actually work in the real world, that build strength rather than dependency, and that help you create the kind of marriage that grows stronger through every challenge life throws at you. Comment, "I control only myself" below if you're ready to stop being a victim of your relationship dynamics and start being its architect through the power of personal virtue and unshakable character. Share this with someone who needs to stop waiting for their spouse to change and start becoming the person who naturally inspires the marriage they've always wanted through the timeless wisdom of Stoic philosophy.